White togas symbolized Roman purity, but their cleaning methods were far from clean. We are putting ancient Roman laundry to the test, recreating their most infamous techniques to see if they truly worked. By the end, you will witness whether 2,000-year-old methods can outsmart modern stains. We will uncover why they used human urine and how they battled stubborn odors. What does it take to keep a civilization clean? A pristine white toga was far more than just a clean garment. In the bustling streets of Rome, your clothing was a walking billboard for your social standing. For a Roman citizen, a bright, well-maintained toga was a non-negotiable symbol of dignity and respectability. It screamed that you were a man of order, a pillar of civilization, not some common laborer stained with the grime of the day. This obsession with appearance was woven into the very fabric of their society. Personal hygiene and public presentation were intimately tied to their ideals of urban life and moral character. But keeping those status symbols spotless was a monumental challenge. The most common fabrics were wool and linen, both of which are incredibly absorbent. Wool, warm and durable, loved to soak up sweat and smoke. Linen, cooler for the Mediterranean heat, showed every speck of dirt and every oil stain with glaring clarity. Imagine the dust from unpaved roads, the splatter from food markets, the smoke from countless oil lamps, and the simple, persistent grime of a city teeming with people and animals. Without the chemical power of modern detergents, how could they possibly fight this daily assault on their public image? The very definition of cleanliness was on the line. Into this daily battle against grime stepped a figure as essential as he was misunderstood, the fullo. The fullo was the Roman laundry professional, a man whose work was vital for the social order, but whose profession placed him on the fringes of respectability. Think of him not as a simple washman, but as a master chemist and textile engineer, working with the only powerful cleaning agents his world possessed. His workshop was the fullonica, a laundry that could range from a single-room operation run by a family to a massive, multi-story industrial complex. The most famous examples, preserved in the ash of Pompeii, reveal an almost factory-like scale. You can still walk through these ruins and see the large, deep vats for soaking garments, the built-in basins for treading cloth, and the intricate drainage systems designed to handle a constant flow of dirty water. The sounds of a fullonica would have been a distinct symphony of sloshing water, the rhythmic stomping of workers in vats, and the pungent, unmistakable smell of the substances they used. This was not a gentle trade. A fuller's hands were rough, his tunic was perpetually stained, and he labored in an environment most wealthy Romans would have found utterly repellent. He was a necessary part of the machine, the man who made the symbols of purity clean. Yet he was never truly welcomed into the pristine world his work made possible. The fullonica of Stephani offers a perfect snapshot of this gritty reality, frozen in time. When Mount Vesuvius erupted, it did not just bury a city, it preserved a moment of work in progress. Walking into this laundry today, you can almost hear the echoes of its last busy day. The layout is surprisingly logical and efficient. You enter into an open courtyard, the heart of the operation, where large, shallow basins are built right into the floor. These are the soaking and washing vats, lined with waterproof cement, but the most striking features are the series of smaller, deeper tubs, each one surrounded by a low wall. This is where the fullones stood, up to their knees in a mixture of water and cleaning agents, stomping rhythmically on the cloth to work the grime out. It was a physically demanding, almost brutal process. In a separate room you can see the pressing area, Here, heavy wooden presses would have been used to wring out excess water and smooth the damp fabric. The garments were then taken to the upper floors or hung in the courtyard to dry in the Mediterranean sun, stretched on ropes or over wooden racks. Archaeologists found the fuller's tools right where they were left, a collection of simple yet effective implements. There were brushes made from prickly thistles for raising the nap on wool, and pots for collecting and mixing the most vital, and most surprising, ingredient in their entire operation. This was not a gentle craft. It was an industrial process, and its key component was something most of us would desperately try to keep out of our clothes. That vital ingredient, collected in pots on street corners, was human urine. It sounds shocking to our modern sensibilities, but for a Roman fuller, this was liquid gold. The secret to its cleaning power lies in a simple chemical reality. Urine, as it breaks down, produces ammonia. Ammonia is a powerful alkaline substance that acts as a natural bleaching agent. It cuts through grease and dirt with remarkable efficiency, lifting stains and helping to whiten the dull, off-white color of natural wool. Think of it as the ancient world's most potent, albeit pungent, all-purpose cleaner. To secure a steady supply, fullers placed large clay jars, called dolia, at busy intersections and outside public latrines. They relied on the generosity, or perhaps simply the urgency, of the passing populace to keep these pots filled. This was not a hidden or shameful trade. It was an organized public enterprise. So much so that the Emperor Vespasian, a man known for his pragmatic and often ruthless financial sense, saw a golden opportunity. He placed a tax on the urine collected from these public pots. The story goes that when his son Titus expressed disgust at the unsavory nature of this tax, Vespasian held a gold coin up to his nose and uttered the famous phrase, "Pecunia non olit." Money does not stink. This single act underscores a profound truth about ancient Roman life. The line between what we consider clean and dirty, respectable and revolting, was drawn in a very different place. Their quest for visible purity was built upon a foundation that was, by any modern definition, profoundly filthy. But urine was only one weapon in the fuller's arsenal. Another powerful cleaner grew quietly in the fields and along riverbanks, a humble plant known as soapwort. Its scientific name, Saponaria officinalis, hints at its ancient purpose, with sopo being the Latin root for soap. When the roots of this plant were bruised, chopped, and vigorously agitated in warm water, they released saponins, natural compounds that created a gentle, effective lather. This was not the thick, perfumed foam of a modern bar soap, but a subtle, slippery suds that could lift oils and dirt from delicate fibers without the harsh, bleaching power of ammonia. Imagine a fuller carefully harvesting these roots, then pounding them in a mortar before soaking them in a vat of water. He would then swish and squeeze the garments through this soapy solution. A quieter, more meticulous process compared to the violent stomping in the urine baths. It was likely reserved for finer cloth or for a final rinse, a gentler touch in an otherwise abrasive routine. Beyond soapwort, the fullers used whatever the earth provided. Wood ashes, when mixed with water, create a caustic solution called lye, another potent cleaner. Certain types of clay, particularly fuller's earth, were prized for their ability to absorb grease and ground in dirt much like a modern dry cleaning compound. They would sprinkle this fine, absorbent powder onto a garment, brush it in, and then beat or shake it out, carrying the grime away with it. The process of gathering and preparing these natural detergents was a craft in itself, a deep understanding of local botany and geology applied to the relentless pursuit of cleanliness. This was not a single, simple recipe, but a layered, almost alchemical practice. blending the pungent chemistry of human waste with the quiet, cleansing power of the natural world. The garments arrived at the fullonica caked with the filth of urban life, and the battle to restore them began not with scrubbing, but with a long chemical soak. Workers would first submerge the soiled wool and linen in large, deep vats, known as lacus, filled with a simple but potent mixture of water and stale urine. This was the crucial first step, a patient and passive assault on the stains. The purpose was not to remove the dirt immediately, but to break its grip on the fabric's fibers. The alkaline ammonia in the urine would slowly work to dissolve the greasy, organic grime that bonded the dust and soot to the cloth. Think of it like marinating a tough piece of meat to tenderize it, a slow chemical process that softens the target for the physical labor to come. In a small family-run shop, this might happen in a few large pottery jars, but in an industrial fullonica like the one owned by Stefani, this soaking occurred in massive, built-in cement basins that could handle dozens of garments at once. The clothes would sit for hours, sometimes even days, stewing in this pungent bath until the dirt was loosened, and the fabric was primed for the next, more violent phase of its cleaning. For our own test, we replicated this exact first step, filling a container with water and our own carefully aged ingredient. Watching a modern piece of white wool slowly disappear into that yellow liquid was a surreal moment, connecting us directly to the fullers of 2,000 years ago. We had to wonder, as the cloth sank beneath the surface, would this ancient chemistry truly begin its work? Or were we just creating a modern mess? The moment of truth had arrived. We gathered our materials to build a small-scale Roman soaking vat, starting with a large, unglazed ceramic pot. Its porous surface a close match for the ancient lacus. We filled it with clean water, and then came the most challenging part, adding the first cleaning agent. Following the historical method, we carefully poured in a quantity of aged human urine, the ammonia-rich liquid clouding the water instantly. The scent that rose from the vat was sharp and unmistakable, a pungent reminder of the reality behind Roman cleanliness. For our test fabric, we chose a square of undyed wool, and we deliberately soiled it with substances a Roman toga would have known well, a drizzle of olive oil, and a generous coating of fine, powdery dust. We watched as the cloth, now grimy and dark, slipped beneath the surface of the yellowish solution. The initial challenge was purely sensory, overcoming the instinct to recoil from the very substance we were relying on to clean. We left the wool to soak, just as the fullones did, for an entire day. The first few hours showed little visible change, the fabric resting silently in its chemical bath. This was the patient part of the process, a waiting game where ancient chemistry had to do its slow, invisible work. Could 2,000-year-old science truly begin to dismantle the bonds of oil and dirt on our modern cloth? The answer was hiding in that pot, and we had to resist the urge to check on it, letting time and ammonia work their mysterious, and frankly smelly, magic. After a full day of soaking, the real work began. The fuller would step into a smaller, deeper vat, bracing himself against the low walls as he lowered his feet into the murky, pungent liquid. This was the fullo's dance, a rhythmic, grueling stomp that churned the water and churned the cloth. It was not a gentle washing. It was a sustained, physical assault on the fabric, a deliberate act of controlled violence designed to pummel the dirt loose. For hours on end, he would trample the sodden wool or linen, his feet and legs providing the mechanical force that the soaking process had primed the fabric for. The ammonia from the urine had already chemically weakened the bonds of oil and grime, and now this relentless agitation finished the job, physically shaking the filth free from the fibers. The effectiveness of this method is undeniable from a purely mechanical standpoint. Think of how you might scrub a stubborn stain on a modern countertop, using force and friction to dislodge it. The fuller was doing the same thing, but on a massive, whole-body scale, using his entire lower body as a living, breathing washing machine agitator. From our modern perspective, the hygiene of this practice is almost unthinkable. We recoil at the idea of submerging our bare skin in a vat of human waste, fearing contamination and disease. Yet for the Romans, this was a calculated trade-off. They understood the powerful cleaning properties of aged urine, and they accepted the process for the results it produced. The fuller himself was a man accustomed to this environment, his skin likely toughened and perhaps even protected by a layer of dirt and callus. The goal was not personal cleanliness for the worker, but the ultimate cleanliness of the garment, a purity that would allow a Roman citizen to walk through the forum spotless and proud. The dirt was being transferred from the cloth to the water, and from the water to the fuller's own body, a stark reminder that one person's filth was another person's livelihood. In our own test, we faced this dilemma head-on. We had to find a safe way to replicate this violent agitation without exposing ourselves to risk. Could we achieve the same results the fullones did? Or would our modern caution prevent us from unlocking the true power of their ancient method? Our own attempt at the fullo's dance began with a large wooden tub. For safety, we substituted a clear ammonia solution for the actual urine, matching the alkaline strength the Romans would have used. The sharp chemical smell still filled the air, a potent echo of the ancient workshops. The pre-soaked wool sat at the bottom, a dark, heavy lump in the cloudy water. Stepping into the tub was a strange moment, the liquid cool against our legs, the fabric squelching underfoot. Then the stomping began. It was not graceful. It was a clumsy, rhythmic pressing and twisting, using our full body weight to churn the water and pummel the cloth. The physical effort was surprising, a constant, squatting motion that quickly burned in our thighs and calves. This was not a gentle swish. It was a sustained, muddy wrestling match with the fabric. You can easily see the direct parallel to a modern washing machine. The agitator in the center of the machine does the exact same thing, spinning back and forth to violently slosh the clothes through the water. We were simply the living, breathing version of that mechanical part. After 20 minutes of this exhausting work, we lifted the fabric to check. The water was noticeably darker, clouded with the dirt and oil being beaten out of the wool. The cloth itself felt different, less stiff and greasy. The method was undeniably working, but at a cost of sheer, brute effort that no modern person would ever volunteer for. While our feet were busy stomping, the fuller had another, quieter trick up his sleeve for stubborn stains. Beyond the noisy vats sat a different kind of cleaning agent, a fine, dusty powder known as fuller's earth. This was not dirt in the ordinary sense, but a special type of clay, prized for its remarkable ability to absorb grease. Think of it like the ancient world's version of baking soda or cornstarch, a natural substance you might sprinkle on a fresh oil stain today. The Romans sourced these special clays from specific deposits, often near riverbeds or in certain geological formations. They would dig it up, dry it in the sun, and then crush it into an ultra-fine powder, sifting out any pebbles or coarse material. The resulting dust was incredibly lightweight and had a soft, almost chalky feel. The secret to its power lies in its microscopic structure. The particles of this clay are like tiny, porous sponges with a massive surface area. When sprinkled onto a greasy woolen garment, these particles immediately begin to soak up the oils, drawing them right out of the fabric's fibers. The fuller would dust the stained areas generously, sometimes brushing it in to ensure good contact. and then let the clay sit, allowing it to work its absorbent magic. After a period of time, he would not wash the garment, but instead take it outside and beat it vigorously. With each powerful whack against a wooden frame or a stone wall, the now greasy clay powder would explode into a cloud, carrying the trapped oils and dirt away with it. This was a form of dry cleaning, a brilliant low-moisture method for tackling the most persistent, oily stains that even urine and stomping could not fully remove. The air in the fullonica would have been thick not just with the smell of ammonia, but with the fine, clean dust of the earth itself, a testament to their sophisticated, multi-layered approach to achieving that impossible Roman white. The quiet power of Fuller's earth offered a completely different kind of cleaning, one that required patience instead of brute force. For our next experiment, we focused on this ancient dry cleaning method, testing it against the most common and stubborn stains a Roman toga would face. We prepared 3 separate squares of white wool, deliberately soiling one with dark red wine, another with a generous splash of olive oil, and a third with a thick paste of mud and dust. The challenge was clear. The wine had left a vivid purple blotch, the oil a dark, translucent patch, and the mud a crusty, matted area. We then prepared our fuller's earth, a fine, pale clay powder, by mixing it with a little water to form a thick, spreadable paste. The goal was to create a poultice that would draw the stains out from the inside. We carefully slathered this cool, grey paste over each stain, completely covering the affected areas with a heavy, even layer. Then we did the hardest part of the entire process. We waited. We left the cloths to sit for hours, allowing the Mediterranean sun, just as it would have in a Roman courtyard, to slowly bake the paste until it was dry and cracked. You could watch the moisture wicking out of the fabric, pulling the trapped impurities up into the clay. The transformation was visible. On the oil stain, the once dark patch was now a lighter shadow beneath the dusty crust. The wine stain seemed to have faded at its edges. The mud, however, looked much the same, locked into the fibers. After the paste was fully dried and hardened, we took a stiff bristle brush and began to scrape and beat the cloth, just as a fuller would have. A cloud of fine, stained dust poofed into the air with each stroke. Brushing away the residue revealed the results. The olive oil stain was almost completely gone, the wool beneath it looking remarkably clean. The wine stain had lightened significantly, though a faint pinkish hue remained. The mud stain, however, was barely affected. The reason for this lies in the nature of the stains themselves. Fuller's earth is a champion at absorbing oils and greases. Its microscopic, sponge-like particles literally suck the lipids right out of the fabric. The wine, being a liquid with some organic pigments, was partially lifted as the paste drew moisture out, but the coloring agents were tenacious. The mud, a combination of inorganic dirt and water, had simply dried into the fibers, and the clay had little to no effect on it. This test showed us the brilliant specificity of Roman laundry science. They were not just throwing everything at a stain and hoping something worked. They had a targeted solution. For grease, you reached for the earth. For ground in dirt, you needed the stomping vat. It was a sophisticated toolkit, where each method had its purpose, and each stain met its match. The stomping vats and the drying clay had done their work, but the garments were now steeped in the very substances that made them clean. A toga soaked in urine and caked with fuller's earth was hardly a symbol of purity. The final critical step was the rinse. Walking through the ruins of a fullonica, you can see a clear sequence of tanks, often 3 or more, built right into the floor in a careful line. This was not a single dunk in clean water. It was a meticulous, multi-stage migration. A worker would lift the heavy, sodden cloth from the first, dirtiest washing vat, and wring it out slightly before plunging it into the first rinsing basin. This initial rinse water was already clouded, capturing the bulk of the loosened filth and the majority of the ammonia. He would swish and squeeze the fabric, then move it to the next tank, where the water was noticeably clearer. With each transfer from one lacquer to the next, the garment shed more of its grimy history and its chemical bath. The goal was to leave no trace of the cleaning process behind, to ensure that the wool carried the fresh scent of water and air, not the pungent reminder of its restoration. This system of cascading cleanliness was a masterstroke of practical engineering, a simple yet brilliant method for conserving water while achieving a thorough result. They used the same water volume repeatedly, but each tank had a specific, less contaminated purpose, a progressive purification that mirrored the very transformation of the cloth itself. But where did all this water come from? In a city like Pompeii, fullonica were often connected to the public aqueduct system, tapping into a constant flow from mountain springs. They also collected rainwater in impluvium courtyards and had sophisticated drainage channels to carry the waste water away into the city's sewers. Managing this hydraulic cycle was as vital to the fuller's operation as the urine pots themselves. Without a relentless supply of fresh water and an efficient way to dispose of the dirty, the entire system would have collapsed into a single, stagnant, and foul-smelling pond. The rinse was the final, liberating baptism. The moment the cloth was reborn, ready to be pressed and stretched, its journey from filth to dignity nearly complete. Our own rinsing station took shape in the sunlight, a line of 3 large ceramic bowls filled with fresh water. This simple setup mirrored the sophisticated tank system found in every major fullonica. The fabric we pulled from our stomping tub was heavy, dripping with the murky, ammonia-laced water that had loosened the grime. It was far from clean, still holding the visible residue of its journey. We wrung it out slightly, watching the dark liquid drain back into the tub, and then plunged it into the first rinsing bowl. The moment the cloth hit the water, the transformation began. The clear water in the first bowl instantly clouded into a yellowish brown, a vivid testament to just how much dirt and cleaning agent was still saturated in the wool fibers. We swirled and squeezed the fabric, feeling the texture change as the first wave of filth was released. Lifting it out, the cloth was already noticeably lighter, but the water left on our hands was still visibly contaminated. We then moved the garment to the second bowl. Here, the water became only slightly cloudy, a pale shadow of the first basin. This stage was washing away the finer particles and the residual traces of the ammonia, a crucial step in eliminating the pungent smell. With a final gentle squeeze, we transferred the wool to the third and final bowl. This water remained almost perfectly clear, with just the faintest haze. When we lifted the fabric from this last rinse, the difference was striking. The water that dripped from it was clean. The sharp chemical odor was gone, replaced by the simple, neutral scent of wet wool. To test this scientifically, we used simple pH strips. The water in the first rinse bowl was highly alkaline, a direct result of the ammonia. The second bowl was only slightly alkaline, and the water in the final bowl registered a near-neutral pH, proving that the chemical traces had been virtually eliminated. This cascading method was a masterclass in efficiency. The Romans were not just rinsing, they were purifying in stages, using a single volume of water to its maximum potential. Instead of using 3 bowls of clean water for one rinse, they used the same water to rinse 3 garments in sequence, each one moving to a cleaner station. It was a brilliant, sustainable loop designed for an environment where fresh water, while available from aqueducts, still required labor to move and heat. Every transfer from one tank to the next was a step closer to that ideal of Roman purity. A physical journey from the chemical-laden workshop to the fresh, air-dried garment ready for a citizen to wear. The system was not just about getting clothes clean. It was about doing so with a shrewd, almost elegant, economy of effort and resources. Seeing the clear water in that final bowl, we had to acknowledge the sheer cleverness of their process. The final hurdle, however, still remained. How would they transform this damp, clean cloth into the crisp, bright garment that defined a Roman in the public eye? A damp, clean garment was still a long way from the crisp, pleated masterpiece a Roman citizen required. The final stage of the process demanded a different kind of expertise, one focused on precision and form. This was the realm of the press and the smoothing tool, where the fabric was physically coerced into its proper shape. The first challenge was simply the weight of the water. A freshly rinsed wool toga was incredibly heavy, and simply hanging it would stretch the fibers out of shape. To solve this, the fullers used a brilliant device called a pressorium. This was a large wooden screw press. The wet garment would be carefully folded and placed between two flat boards. Then, by turning a massive wooden screw, the fuller would apply immense, controlled pressure, squeezing the trapped water out in a steady stream. It was a far more efficient and thorough method than wringing by hand, preserving the fabric's integrity while preparing it for the next step. Once the cloth was merely damp, the true finishing could begin. For smoothing, they did not have heated electric irons, but they had something just as effective. They used smooth, heavy stones or pieces of glass, often heated in a fire, that they would rub back and forth over the fabric, stretched on a flat surface. Later, they developed metal smoothers that looked like flat-bottomed pans. These were filled with hot coals from the hearth, and the fuller would glide the hot, heavy base over the linen or wool, pressing out the wrinkles with a combination of heat, weight, and skilled, repetitive motion. The hiss of steam rising from the damp cloth would have been a familiar sound in the finishing room. But for the toga, the work was even more specialized. Draping a toga correctly was a complex art, a sign of social standing in itself. The fuller had to know exactly where to press in the permanent folds, and how to shape the semicircular cloth so that it would fall in the correct, elegant cascades over the wearer's shoulder and arm. It was not just about removing wrinkles. It was about engineering a silhouette. A poorly finished toga would look sloppy and awkward, betraying the hours of brutal cleaning that came before. The final result was a testament to the fuller's complete mastery over his craft. From the foul-smelling vats to the delicate, heat-driven art of the press. Our own pressing process began with a simple, hand-crafted wooden screw press. Lifting the heavy, waterlogged wool from its final rinse was a reminder of just how much moisture the fabric retained. We carefully folded the cloth and positioned it between two flat planks of wood. Then we began turning the screw. The initial resistance was minimal, but as the screw bit deeper, the pressure mounted dramatically. A steady stream of water poured from between the planks, forced out by the immense, focused force. The physical effort required to turn the screw was substantial. A slow, grinding labor that engaged the shoulders and back. When we finally released the mechanism and unfolded the fabric, the result was striking. The wool was no longer sopping wet, but merely damp to the touch. The press had removed far more water than hand wringing ever could, and it had done so without stretching or distorting the fibers. This single tool was a game changer for efficiency, transforming a back-breaking task of wringing into a manageable mechanical process. It prepared the cloth perfectly for the next, more delicate challenge, the art of smoothing. With the fabric damp and pliable, we turned to the Roman equivalent of an iron. We selected a smooth, flat river stone and heated it gently in the embers of a fire. Using thick leather gloves to protect our hands, we lifted the warm stone and began to rub it back and forth over a section of the wool, which we had stretched taut across a wooden table. The effect was immediate. A low hiss of steam rose from the cloth as the stone's heat met the residual moisture. The weight of the stone and the friction of its smooth surface worked together to press the fibers flat. The result was not the sharp, crisp crease of a modern steam iron, but a softer, more natural smoothness. It was effective, but the stone cooled quickly, requiring constant reheating. We then experimented with a reproduction of a Roman metal smoother, a heavy bronze implement with a flat, polished base that we filled with hot coals. This tool retained heat far longer, and its smooth surface glided more easily. It required a rhythmic, patient motion, a constant back and forth that demanded attention to avoid scorching the delicate wool. One moment of hesitation, one pause in the motion, and the intense, localized heat could easily singe the fabric, leaving a permanent brown mark. This was not a task for the impatient or the careless. It was a skill built on rhythm and feel, a delicate balance between applying enough heat to smooth and enough motion to protect. Comparing these ancient methods to a modern iron reveals a stark contrast in effort and precision. Our contemporary irons, with their regulated thermostats and steady jets of steam, deliver perfect, consistent results with minimal physical labor. The Roman approach was a full-body workout. It demanded strength for the screw press and endurance for the long, repetitive strokes of the heated smoothers. The risk of damaging the very garment you had worked so hard to clean was ever present. A single misstep with the hot metal could ruin a costly piece of clothing. Yet, for all its difficulty, the Roman method was deeply effective within its limits. It produced a respectable, wearable smoothness, a finish that would have been more than acceptable for daily life in the Forum. It achieved this not through technological magic, but through a profound understanding of materials, heat, and physics. The fuller was not just a cleaner, he was a finisher, a craftsman who guided the cloth through its final transformation. His hands had to judge the perfect level of dampness, the correct heat of the metal, and the precise pressure needed to achieve that ideal Roman drape without destroying weeks of work in a single, careless moment. Even after pressing and smoothing, the garments were not yet truly white. The final, most crucial transformation required nothing more than the open sky and the passage of time. Romans harnessed the sun itself as a powerful, natural bleaching agent. They would take the damp, clean cloth and spread it out on special, curved frames made of wicker, or stretched it over large, sloping fields of bushes known as bleaching field. The goal was to maximize the fabric's surface area, exposing every fiber to the Mediterranean sun's intense, unfiltered light. This was not a passive drying process. It was an active chemical reaction. The ultraviolet rays from the sunlight interacted with water molecules, still trapped within the fabric, slowly breaking down the organic compounds that caused yellowing or dullness. Think of how a white piece of paper left on a sunny windowsill will gradually brighten over weeks, the sun naturally burning away the faintest discolorations. For wool and linen, this process was particularly effective. Both are natural fibers that respond beautifully to this gentle, persistent bleaching. Linen, being a plant fiber, would become brilliantly white, its natural sheen amplified by the sun. Wool, which can have a slightly off-white or creamy tint, would lighten to a purer, more radiant shade. This was the ultimate finishing touch, a patient collaboration with nature that turned a simply clean garment into a dazzling status symbol. But what about the days when the sun was not enough, or when a client demanded faster, more dramatic results? For those situations, the fullers had a secret and far more dangerous weapon in their arsenal. They would use sulfur. In a small enclosed chamber, they would burn lumps of raw sulfur, creating thick, acrid fumes. They would then hang the damp garments in this sulfurous atmosphere, sealing the room to trap the gas. The sulfur dioxide gas acted as a powerful, fast-acting bleaching agent, reacting with the moisture on the fabric to literally bleach the color out of it. It was a risky procedure, producing toxic fumes that could choke the workers and damage their lungs. The choice between the slow, safe power of the sun and the quick, hazardous power of sulfur reveals the two sides of Roman ingenuity. One method was a patient partnership with the natural world. The other was a violent, chemical shortcut that came with a very real human cost. Both, however, were dedicated to the same impossible goal: achieving a perfect, pristine white in a world full of grime. The final stage of our Roman laundry test brought us out into the open air, where the most powerful cleaning agent of all was completely free. We stretched our freshly pressed wool fabric over a curved wicker frame, a replica of the ancient bleaching fields, and placed it in a spot bathed in direct sunlight. Right beside it, we set an identical piece of laundered cloth in the deep shade of a covered porch. This was our control, a necessary baseline to prove that any change was truly from the sun's influence, and not just the air itself. For hours, then days, we watched and waited. This was not a process for the impatient. The initial changes were so subtle, they were almost imperceptible. After the first full day, the sun-bleached fabric seemed just a fraction brighter, a touch less creamy than its shaded twin. The real magic, however, began to reveal itself over time. The ultraviolet radiation in sunlight is a gentle but persistent chemical worker. It doesn't scrub or dissolve stains. Instead, it breaks down the chemical bonds of the colored molecules within the fibers themselves. It literally fades the discoloration away. The effectiveness of this natural process depends on a delicate dance of environmental factors. A bright, cloudless day with low humidity is ideal, allowing maximum UV penetration. The high sun of midday is far more potent than the weak light of early morning or late afternoon. Even the fabric type matters. Linen, a plant fiber, bleaches to a brilliant white more readily than wool, which has a natural yellowish lanolin oil that resists the sun's power. We documented the slow, steady brightening of our sun-exposed sample, while the control piece in the shade remained stubbornly unchanged. Its off-white hue a silent testament to the sun's silent labor. Comparing this ancient method to a modern chemical bleach is like comparing a slow-cooked meal to a flash-fried snack. A splash of chlorine bleach in a washing machine works in minutes, aggressively oxidizing stains and creating an almost artificially bright white. The sun, however, works with a patient, organic rhythm. It doesn't weaken the fabric fibers the way harsh chemicals can over time. It doesn't leave behind that sharp, swimming pool scent. The Roman method produced a different kind of white, a softer, more natural luminosity that felt earned rather than manufactured. It was a purity achieved not through brute chemical force, but through a harmonious partnership with the environment. This patient waiting game, however, leads to a final, pressing question. After all this brutal stomping, chemical soaking, and patient sun bleaching, did the Roman methods actually work? Could they truly restore a garment to a state worthy of a citizen in the Forum? The moment to unveil our final results had arrived. The lingering scent of ammonia must have clung to the air of every fullonica, a ghost of the cleaning process itself. So how did a Roman citizen, draped in his freshly cleaned toga, avoid smelling like a public latrine? The answer lies in the final, almost obsessive, stages of rinsing we recreated. Our own cascading bowls proved that a thorough multi-stage wash in fresh, flowing water was remarkably effective at stripping away the chemical traces. The water in our final basin was nearly neutral, and the fabric itself carried only the mild, earthy scent of wet wool. But for an extra layer of assurance, the Romans turned to the gardens. They would often add bundles of fragrant herbs to the last rinsing water. Lavender, with its calming, clean aroma, was a favorite. Roses, thyme, and mint were also used, not to perfume the cloth heavily, but to impart a subtle, fresh fragrance that would mask any final, faint chemical notes. The final and most powerful deodorant, however, was the same element that bleached the cloth. Hours stretched under the hot sun did more than just brighten the fibers. The ultraviolet light and the fresh air acted as a powerful natural deodorizer, breaking down odor-causing molecules and leaving the garment smelling simply of the outdoors. We must also consider the context of their world. The streets of Rome were filled with a symphony of smells, from smoking food stalls and animal dung to industrial smoke, and the general odor of a million people living in close quarters. In that rich and complex olfactory landscape, the faint, clean scent of sun-dried wool might have been a welcome relief. A Roman's priority was visual purity, that stark, commanding white. As long as the garment did not carry the sharp, offensive punch of stale urine, a mild, herbal freshness was likely more than enough to declare the laundry process a complete success. The true test of cleanliness is not just in how a fabric looks, but in how it smells. We gathered our finished textiles, the wool washed in the ancient urine-based solution, and a duplicate piece cleaned with a mild, unscented modern soap. Visually, both were a respectable white, but the air around them told a different story. The modern soap sample carried a neutral, almost blank scent, the absence of odor we now associate with clean. The Roman washed cloth, however, had a faint but distinct character. It was not the sharp punch of ammonia we feared, but a more complex aroma. An earthy, slightly musky scent underpinned by the clean smell of sun-dried wool. It was not unpleasant, but it was definitely present. To remove our own bias, we conducted a simple blind test with a few volunteers. We presented them with both fabrics, asking which ones smelled cleaner. The results were revealing and split. Half immediately chose the neutral-smelling modern sample. The other half, after a thoughtful sniff, chose the Roman cloth, describing its scent as more natural or authentic, like the smell of fresh hay or a wool sweater dried outside. No one detected the chemical ghost of urine, a testament to the effectiveness of their multi-stage rinsing process. This sensory experiment points to a profound cultural difference. Our modern definition of clean is often synonymous with odorless, a sterile blank slate. For a Roman, clean was a visual and textural achievement. A faint, earthy, natural scent was an acceptable, perhaps even unnoticed, byproduct of a process that delivered the most important result: a garment that looked pure and dignified in the public square. Their sensory tolerance was calibrated to a world rich with organic smells, where the goal was to overcome foulness, not to achieve absolute neutrality. The lingering whisper of the earth on their togas was simply the price of admission to a spotless reputation. Two fabrics dominated the Roman wardrobe, and each presented a unique battlefield for the fuller. Wool, the workhorse of the ancient world, and linen, the cooler alternative for the Mediterranean heat, responded to our brutal cleaning methods in dramatically different ways. We prepared identical squares of each, staining them with the classic Roman combination of olive oil and dust. From the very first moment, their personalities diverged. The wool, a spongy, absorbent material, drank in the oil, creating a dark, wide-spreading blotch. The linen, with its smoother, more tightly woven fibers, resisted the initial penetration, the oil beating up on the surface before slowly sinking in as a more defined spot. This fundamental difference in how they accepted dirt would dictate their entire journey through the cleaning process. When submerged in the urine and water solution, the wool seemed to welcome the chemical soak, the ammonia penetrating deep into its fibers to attack the grease from within. The linen, however, remained more aloof, the liquid taking longer to saturate its dense weave. The moment of stomping revealed another stark contrast. Wool is a resilient, almost bouncy fabric. It could withstand the violent, full-body pummeling, its fibers springing back without showing significant wear. Linen, being a plant fiber, is stronger but less elastic. Our stomping felt different, the fabric offering a tougher, more resistant feel. And we worried that prolonged, harsh agitation could eventually weaken its threads. The real surprise came with fuller's earth. The oily stain on the wool, which had been so deeply absorbed, was drawn out with remarkable efficiency, the clay pulling the grease back to the surface. On the linen, the paste was less effective. Because the oil had not penetrated as deeply, the earth seemed to work on a more superficial level, leaving a faint shadow of the stain behind after the powder was beaten out. This performance under pressure explains why wool was the fabric of choice for most Romans. It was durable, warm, and most importantly, it responded beautifully to the very specific, abrasive cleaning methods that were available. Its natural texture and absorbency made it a perfect partner for the fuller's alchemy of urine and clay. Linen, while luxurious and cool, required a more delicate touch, something the industrial fullonica was not always designed to provide. For the ultimate luxury, like silk, the process would have been entirely different. A precious silk garment would never see the inside of a stomping vat. It would have been carefully hand-washed with the gentlest soaps, like soapwort, and perfumed with rare oils, its care a world apart from the brutal, public necessity of cleaning the woolen toga. The very fabric you wore determined not just your comfort, but the specific path it would take through the pungent, demanding world of Roman cleanliness. A pristine white toga was a luxury item long before it ever reached the fuller. For the average Roman citizen, the cost of professional laundering was a significant and recurring expense. We have records, scratched into wax tablets and noted in ledgers, that give us a glimpse into the economics of cleanliness. A single laundering of a standard tunic could cost a few asses, the small bronze coins that were the pocket change of the empire. While this sounds minimal, it adds up when you consider a large household with multiple changes of clothing for each member, plus the heavy, complex togas and stolas. For a wealthy senator, this was a trivial cost, a necessary overhead for maintaining his public image. But for a common shopkeeper or a legionary's wife, that same fee could represent a full day's wages. The materials themselves were part of the cost. While the fullers collected public urine for free, the best quality supplies, like specific types of fuller's earth imported from distant islands or fragrant herbs for the final rinse, carried a price tag. The fuller was not just selling labor, he was selling expertise and access to a curated arsenal of cleaning agents. His fee was a direct investment in social capital, a payment that guaranteed your appearance would not betray your station. This created a clear class divide in Roman hygiene. The wealthy outsourced the dirty work, paying to have their symbols of purity professionally maintained. The poor and the vast population of slaves had no such option. They relied on home methods, a starkly different approach to the same problem of dirt. In the cramped insulae or apartment blocks, laundry was a domestic chore. Clothes were washed in buckets or at public fountains using simple soapwort gathered from the countryside or ashes from the cooking fire. They were beaten against rocks in the Tiber River, a free but labor-intensive process that wore fabrics out quickly. For a slave, this was just another task on a long list of duties, and the results were functional, not prestigious. The brilliant white achieved by the fullonica was a visual marker, a walking advertisement that you could afford to pay someone else to handle your filth. This entire industry, from the urine tax to the fullo's fee, was a small but vital cog in the massive engine of the Roman economy. It employed thousands, from the men who stomped the vats to the potters who made the dolia and the merchants who shipped the special clays. Cleanliness was not just about morality, it was a commodity, and like all commodities in Rome, its distribution was deeply unequal. The fullo's workshop was a world of invisible dangers. Every breath he took was laced with the sharp sting of ammonia fumes rising from the vats of stale urine. Prolonged exposure to these vapors would have been a constant, slow-burning assault on his health. In the short term, it meant burning eyes, a raw throat, and a persistent cough. Over years, it could have led to chronic respiratory conditions, damaging the delicate tissues of his lungs and leaving him vulnerable to infections in an age without antibiotics. And the risks did not stop with breathing. His bare legs and feet, submerged for hours in the alkaline solution, would have been stripped of their natural protective oils. The result was likely severe skin irritations, painful cracking, and open sores that never fully healed. A direct pathway for infection in the unsanitary conditions of the workshop. The physical labor itself was a grinding hazard. The relentless stomping in the vats placed immense strain on his knees, hips, and back. A recipe for lifelong joint pain and skeletal deformities. Operating the heavy wooden screw press required brute force, risking crushed fingers, muscle tears, and hernias. This was not a profession for a long and healthy life. How did they cope with these daily dangers? Mitigation was crude and limited. A fuller might have tied a cloth over his nose and mouth, a feeble barrier against the pervasive fumes. He might have coated his legs in animal fat or olive oil before stepping into the vats, creating a primitive protective layer against the harsh chemicals. The design of the fullonica itself offered a small reprieve, with its open courtyards designed to ventilate the worst of the smells and fumes, a passive acknowledgement of the toxic environment. The archaeological record offers silent, grim testimony to their suffering. The skeletal remains of fullers, if they can be identified, might show the telltale signs of this brutal work: arthritic joints and spinal compression from a lifetime of heavy, repetitive labor. There were no safety inspectors, no workers' compensation. A fuller accepted this physical degradation as the price of his trade, the hidden cost behind every spotless white toga that graced the streets of Rome. Our own messy experiments join a growing body of serious scientific inquiry into Roman cleaning. Archaeologists have used powerful microscopes to examine the residues caked into the pores of ancient laundry tools, and the findings are revealing. On the inside of clay pots recovered from fullonici, they have identified microscopic traces of fatty acids and sterols, the chemical fingerprints of human urine. Even more telling, the grinding stones used to crush fuller's earth still hold particles of specific clays known for their high absorbency, confirming the written records of their use. This is not just guesswork. It is physical proof of the very substances we struggled with in our own backyard. Experimental archaeology projects at universities and historical parks have taken this even further, running controlled, long-term tests. One such study meticulously recreated the full Roman process on multiple batches of soiled wool, then used chemical analysis to measure the results. Their data confirmed what we observed firsthand: that the ammonia-based method was remarkably effective at removing organic, greasy stains, but struggled with inorganic dirt like plain mud without the mechanical force of stomping. The scientific breakdown of the chemistry is elegantly simple. The ammonia from the urine, a base, saponifies the fatty acids in animal and human oils, effectively turning them into a crude soap that can be rinsed away. This perfectly explains why our oil-stained wool came out so clean, while the mud-stained piece required more physical effort. The biggest surprise from these formal studies, however, was the documented effectiveness of soapwort. Modern gas chromatography has isolated the specific saponin molecules in the plant, showing how they form micelles that trap and lift away grease at a microscopic level. A gentle but powerful process we could only witness on the surface of our fabric. Seeing our amateur results align with peer-reviewed science is profoundly validating. It transforms our quirky experiment from a simple curiosity into a small piece of a much larger puzzle, one that confirms the Romans were not just lucky, but were applying a sophisticated, if pungent, understanding of chemistry and physics to their daily lives. After all the stomping, rinsing, and sun bleaching, the results were in. The Roman methods, in their own context, were a resounding success. Our urine soaked, stomped, and earth-rubbed wool emerged clean, with the stubborn olive oil stain nearly vanished, and the fabric itself restored to a respectable, sun-brightened white. The system was not perfect, of course. The mud stain required relentless physical effort, and the lingering earthy scent was a world away from our modern, odorless definition of clean. But judged by the standards of ancient Rome, where visual purity was the ultimate goal, the process worked with remarkable efficiency. Their ingenuity lay in a layered approach, a clever toolkit where each method had a specific purpose. Urine's ammonia broke down grease, fuller's earth absorbed it, and mechanical stomping dislodged grit, all orchestrated with a shrewd understanding of chemistry and physics. The true limitation was the immense human cost, the brutal labor and health hazards endured by the fullers themselves. Our modern laundry is a miracle of convenience, a single button press delivering sterility and freshness without effort. The Roman way was a partnership with the natural world, a patient, labor-intensive dance that transformed filth into dignity. It forces us to wonder whether our own spotless clothes have lost a certain tangible connection to the work and wisdom required to make them clean. Which of these ancient techniques, from the pungent chemistry to the patient power of the sun, surprised you the most?